everybody's got a philosophy, and I know, I've heard people keep it simple, stupid,
Yeah.
but everybody's got a little different philosophy in life. The one I came up with is, baffle them with BS. So, if you think you were confused last week, you wait till I get out here. Our lesson today is from James, and I'm gonna let Jim read that if you would, Jim.
Guys, this is from James 2, 1 through 13. If you hadn't read it, this might be the shortest book in the Bible, but it is powerful. My brothers and sisters, when you show favoritism, you deny the faithfulness of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has been resurrected in glory. Imagine two people coming into your meeting. One has a gold ring and fine clothes, while the other is poor, dressed in filthy rags. Then suppose that you would take special notice of the one wearing fine clothes, saying, "Here's an excellent place, sit here." But to the poor person you say, "Stand over there," or "Here, sit at my feet." Wouldn't you have shown favoritism among yourselves and become evil-minded judges? My dear brothers and sisters, listen. Hasn't God chosen those who are poor by worldly standards to be rich in terms of faith? Hasn't God chosen the poor as his heirs of the kingdom he has promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor. Don't the wealthy make life difficult for you? Aren't they the ones who drag you into court? Aren't they the ones who insult the good name spoken over you at your baptism? You do well when you really fulfill the royal law found in Scripture. Love your neighbor as yourself. But when you show favoritism, you're committing a sin, and by that same law, you're exposed as a lawbreaker. Anyone who tries to keep all the law but fails at one point is guilty of failing to keep all of it. The one who said, "Don't commit adultery," also said, "Don't commit murder." So if you don't commit adultery but do commit murder, you're a lawbreaker. In every way, then, speak and act as people who will be judged by the law of freedom. There will be no mercy in judgment for anyone who hasn't shown mercy. Mercy overrules judgment.
Thank you. Before he read that, he made a statement about that. It made me think, Bob, he sort of had the sounds of making somebody who ought to be up here teaching something, don't you guys think? I mean, how would a guy know if that wasn't one of the most important books? If he hadn't been studying some, he should think about sharing that with us more. But our lesson today is from the book of James, and there's some Bible scholars that assume that while there's several Jameses mentioned in the Bible, this book was written by James, the brother of Jesus. That's probably the most accepted theory about the book of James. But there were 5 Jameses mentioned in the New Testament. This James, if it was the brother of Jesus, was known as James the Just, a leader in the early church along with Peter and John. James, the brother of Jesus, was skeptical about Jesus being who he said he was during his early ministry, but he became a converted man due to the fact that he was an eyewitness of the resurrection. I don't know, you guys, I can understand that, having lived in a house for 18 years of a boy that turned out to be a general when he grew up. It's hard for me to look at that person the same way I did when I went down and he was commanding a base down in Memphis, and everybody down there ran around and yes sir and no sir and all kind of respect, and my sister and I are going, God, he's just our little brother, and so, sometimes you can be so close to something you can't see it. And it took James a while, I suspect, to be able to grow up with Jesus and still be able to accept who he was. I can understand that. A less traditional view of the authorship of this book is that it was adapted from Jewish doctrine to represent Christian views by an early Christian, and it definitely has a Jewish slant to it. It has some Old Testament thoughts behind it. There are four main topics in this book. The four main topics are the evil of partiality, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, the need for works along with faith, the danger of loose talk, which we call gossip, and the sins of the rich. As I said, we're going to talk about partiality today. Until I was in the 8th grade, I went to a non-integrated school. There wasn't very much difference. Nearly everybody in my school was pretty much just like me. There wasn't very much difference in the wealth of the families that attended my school. I mean, we had a cotton mill in Trenton, and the guys who came from Milltown were a little rougher cut, and the boys that rode the bus in from the country, some of them didn't have running water yet. They had electricity, and they weren't as cool as everybody else. But the difference, I mean, when we all went to school together, we were brought up the same way. We were definitely not what you call a diverse group. In 1967, they began to introduce black students into my school. And the first year they probably picked the top students. And maybe the coaches picked some of the top athletes to come, because the year after that, all the students from the black school came to school with us, and some of them fit right in, especially those that enabled us to go to the state tournament in basketball when they didn't have one classification, and we were we weren't the second runner-up, but we played into the quarterfinals, and I believe it was about 67 or 68. So when they introduced those students to my school, my response to that was, just go on about your business and don't associate with them. They're different. And that's the way I dealt with it. When I moved on to college, I learned about some other people that I didn't have very much in common with. I learned about Jews and Indians, and Orientals. I learned about city folks. They were different. I met extroverts and introverts and some really smart nerds, but finally I ended up in a fraternity with middle-class white boys and a course of study in agriculture, which, once again, I came from a rural community, and like our community here, there was a whole lot of ag there, and I was familiar with that. My MO, once again, was to move away from those folks that weren't pretty similar to me, to go for my course of study. After I finished my master's degree, I went to work for the University of Tennessee, and they preached the gospel of racial and ethnic diversity, which mainly meant that working for the university, if the area where you work had 10% minority population, or of all the different peoples, ethnicities that were there, you needed to make sure, you needed to be able to justify that your client base that you dealt with reflected that. And that wasn't too hard to do. But after I left the university, I went to work for Monsanto and Bayer, and I took a little further learning in diversity. They selected staff pretty much on what they perceived to be intelligence and what they called agility. not the agility, Larry, that we did in football practice before we started. Agility to them was how well you could express that you were a smart person. My colleagues that I worked with became a lot more diverse in culture, race, creed, national origin, sexual preference, you name it, political views, everything. It looked a lot different than working in agriculture for the University of Tennessee. But here's one thing that they weren't. None of them were poor. Some of them had been poor, but they weren't poor when I was working with them there. You know, I've learned to work with and appreciate a very diverse group of people in my career. But there's one group I still struggle with, and that's the poor, like James talks about in our lesson today. So what are we supposed to do about that? I'll give you a couple of examples of people I know in our community, like a man living with his partner, and they have kids. They're getting some welfare for those kids. Man works, has a steady job, makes $450 every 2 weeks. Things are good until his partner moves out with the kids. And then he's trying to live on $450 every 2 weeks. And rent is $450 a month. So that leaves $450 to make it for the rest of the month. I don't know, I just thought about that. He would make about $10,000 a year. And I guess if you could, it would, for him to be able to function and get by, I would say, you know, for another $4,000 or $5,000, for another $5,000 or $6,000, he could be halfway comfortable. You think about, you know, what we do in our class. We give away a lot of money, but you know, if that's how much it would cost to help that one person, and I know that to be that person's situation, we could help 4 to 8 people like that. So how many people like that do you think there are just in our county? You know, you can ride the streets from this church back over toward Eastgate and back over toward that store that cooks that good fried chicken and all that over there. And there's a lot of people living in a situation that's not a whole lot different than that. I don't want to pick on most of the people that live in that community are blacks, but you don't have to. If you ride the county roads, you know, from the hills above Soundburg down toward Hornby, on those roads that you don't see every day, there are a lot of houses out there that have cars that when they quit running, they just park them there. And there's a lot of them sitting there, and when they have trash, it looks like to me they just kick it off the porch, John. They don't. But the thing is, you know, there are kids living in those houses. And, you know, my son lives here, but most of our sons and daughters don't live here anymore. Those are the sons and daughters that are gonna live with us, because they're not gonna go anywhere. Our kids have moved on. If you listen to Jim read our lesson, it said that God favors. God shows partiality to the poor. Are these the ones that God favors? Are these the ones that Jesus associated with when he was here? Is that part of the reason why the rest of the people didn't like, felt harsh toward Jesus and didn't want him? It was when you start associating with that crowd, like my mother said, be careful who you hang around, because you're going to be associated with them. If those people came to our church, would we treat them ugly? No, we wouldn't. I think we would treat them well if just a few came. But what would we do if more of them came than there are us? And to tell you the truth, that wouldn't take all that many for it to be more of them than there are us. We could get down to 5 or 10 in our class and 25 in church. But I don't see the poorly dressed and the folks in filthy rags showing up on our doorstep. And it's not because we treat them poorly or they expect to be treated poorly. It's not that. And can we resolve that issue by handing them money? Maybe that would help some, but I don't know if you gave away all the money we have collectively. I said, last time I talked about if I just gave away all my money and tried to make it like other people are trying to make it now that don't have anything, we might could give away all the money that all of us have in this class, and it still wouldn't resolve this issue. I think perhaps we need to quit doing what I've done all my life, and that's avoid the issue. We can't resolve the issue because we don't really understand it very well. It's messy, it's sad, it's discouraging, depressing, all those kind of things that we don't like to deal with. I don't like to deal with. I'm speaking for myself here. Maybe the shoe doesn't fit for everybody, but it certainly does for me. Probably the only guy that I know that's hitting this issue head on is the church that Dan Huggins and his wife are running. He deals with it every day. I called him, talked to him. Well, actually, I got Amy too. Amy and I talked to him about some of these kind of things. But Amy's class has served meals out there at their church on Wednesday 2 or 3 different times. And, if Amy does it, I usually try to participate with her. But the one time that was hardest for me was when I got there. They had more help than they needed. And I asked Dan, I said, Dan, what do you need me to do to help here? It was the first time I'd ever helped them with that Wednesday night meal. And he said, what I need you to do is sit down at the table over there and talk to some of these people. Just sit down and talk to them. Man, you talking about uncomfortable now. That ever since then, when I went out there to help them, I make damn sure I got a job to do where I stay busy. Well, I lost one of my pages, so my chain of thought's not too good. But the good news is, Larry, the lesson will be shorter and simpler.
Well, I wanted to tell you on your last comment, Amy sits down with them every day,
She does.
teachers, that's one thing I see.
She does, and I hear that, and you know that, but until you see it, you know, where we got kids out here that don't have a place to live, and they just move from a friend to friend, and sometimes kinfolk to kinfolk, sometimes not, you know, and we wonder why we have some of these issues. So when I was putting this lesson together, like most of the lessons that I put together, I bounced it off my wife, and you know, I got to the point that a lot of the things we've been talking about, Larry, like you said, it's kind of confusing. We talk about whether we believe in sprinkling or dunking, whether we believe in dancing, whether we play music at church, and we worry about some things that probably don't mean near as much as these things I'm talking about here. If you look at the book of James that we just read from, and you know, I don't worry about some of those things, some of those smaller things, and it's not that they don't need to be worried about, but I kind of have to prioritize the things that I worry about, and I'm kind of like in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus was asked, what's the most important commandment? And Jesus just said, two little old things: love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. And you know, I think about what I just told you about how I deal with that, and I don't know if I deal with it, if I was in their position, if I deal with it the way I would like to be dealt with if it was me. And so, you know, if you think about some of the smaller things we talk about and we get sidetracked with, you know, I think many times for me, I do well to put this thought forward rather than some of the things that I do put forward. It's just, this is not a keep it simple, stupid, Larry, but there's a thing called the Einstein theory, and it says E equals mc squared. Looks like just a few little old letters there, but if you really understand that, Bob, if you really understand all that, you can make a nuclear weapon, I suppose.
I don't understand.
I don't understand it either. That's right. He's my straight guy. I don't understand it, but if I did, I'd be powerful. And I think what I just said right there about love the Lord your God above all and love your neighbor as yourself, if you looked at that in the same way as if you understood Einstein's theory, you would be powerful. If you understood that and you practiced it and you lived it, the rest of that stuff in the Bible would just fall together for you. You know, I totally don't understand E equals mc squared. Sometimes I worry that I don't understand love the Lord your God love your neighbor as yourself any better than I understand Einstein's theory. So I'll close with this. It's what my wife said when I ran all this by her, her closing. I said, how you think I ought to close this? And she said, I don't know how you ought to close it, but I tell you this, what are you gonna do about it? And that's how I'll leave it with you. If any of those thoughts sound like something that applies to you, you know, I think we need to think about what we're gonna do about it. One more thing. Last year we supported the ALS event that they had at Discovery Park. Of course, we know Larrabee's situation, and Charles and Amy and a group of ladies are putting that together again, and I would ask that we consider supporting that, Jim, at the same level we did last year. I don't know exactly what that is, but I think they would appreciate it, and that would go a long way for us. There's some others in the community that are dealing with that as well. So
I would move we do that, or $1,000, whichever's higher.
well, I don't know. Jim, you got records on how much we.
Yeah, I don't remember, but it's in the check register.
Is there other business that needs to be brought up, discussed?
Well, normally on the second Sunday, we have